Hello, everybody. Well, Anne-Marie, we just introduced you as CEO of New America Foundation, which is true, but I suspect many people know you for a different accomplishment. This little article that you wrote 3 years ago, which electrified the country, I think is no overstatement to say. The headline was, "Why Women Can't Have It All." Still can't have it all. Thank you. It was the cover story of The Atlantic the summer of 2012. Overnight became the most read story in the history of the magazine. And within 2 weeks, you'd signed a contract to turn it into a book, which is out this week. Unfinished Business, Women, Men, Work, and Family. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So can we assume that in the 3 years between 2012 and now, you figured it out? We can all have it all the time, and you're here to tell us how?
Yeah, absolutely.
In 300 pages or less?
Absolutely. Read this book. Your life will be transformed forever. I think the thing to start with is that I could not have written this book 3 years ago. I absolutely could not have written it because I didn't believe what I now am arguing. I mean, it really was, we overuse the idea of a journey, but it was a process of giving lots of speeches, listening to people who wrote to me, engaging with people, talking to my own family. I found out things about why my father had raised me in a very progressive way in Virginia in the 1960s, and it was because he'd represented women who'd been abandoned by their husbands and didn't have anything to live on. And he vowed his daughter would actually, be able to make a living.
Support yourself no
Absolutely.
matter what.
And looking at my mother's work and her work as an artist and her work as a really nurturer of our family. And then talking to my own husband. And one of the great paradoxes of this whole thing is I did go home from the State Department to be with my children. After 2 years, when this article came out, I was in more demand than ever and actually gone more, not gone as much as I'd been in the State Department, but definitely on the road. And my husband
away from
really
your family more.
Away from my family, and it was a great irony. They would tease me, "Oh, great, go out there and give a speech."
So this is obviously a very personal journey
It
you've
is.
been on. Walk us back to that moment. You were in this high-powered job at the State Department. You're commuting. Your family's back in Princeton, New Jersey. You were here during the week. Was there a particular moment where you suddenly went, "Aha, this ain't working. Something's got to give"?
Well, I would say for 2 years I had been in this constant tug of war where I loved the work and this was what I wanted to do, and I would get these phone calls, and my son was just being a teenager and a particularly acute case of teenagehood. And I would be saying, what am I doing here? And I would say that to my assistant, like, why am I here? So that was not new. What was really the moment was, and I described this, that when Secretary Clinton's chief of staff essentially asked, do you want to put your name in for there are only a couple of jobs above mine, and they were all good. They were all good. And at that moment, it was, I could stay, I could go up, maybe Andy and the boys could come to Washington, but I knew that wasn't going to work. And that was the moment where I said, no, I really do have to go home. And 2 years later, I didn't put my name back in, which was equally a surprise, because at that point, I decided I wanted to be home.
Well, here's my confession. In anticipation of interviewing you today, your publisher kindly couriered the book to me at my hotel in New York, where I was on a work trip this week. And I tried to start it on the train home, but my youngest son's soccer carpool was falling apart, and I had to sort that out from the quiet car. And then I was trying to read it in between meetings and interviews, and my other son got injured, and we had to get the pediatrician on the line. And long story short, I ended up racing through the final chapter in the taxi, in the back seat, on the way over here, which prompts a number of questions, one of which is, are the people who would benefit from your book too frazzled to have time to read it?
So that is such a great question. Somebody wrote me when I wrote the original article and said, you are clearly not a working mother, because if you were, you would know no one can read 13,000 words. I think that's definitely an issue. It's, I think, very readable. You can read it in chunks. But the biggest change from that article in this book, this book is not just written for working women. Indeed, this book says, as long as we keep thinking of this as a working women's issue, we are not going to fix it. We have been doing that for 20 years. So I actually try to change the frame, right? To widen it and to say, this is actually a care problem. It is a problem of workplaces not making room for care. And that, it's as if, well, women went into the workforce. 60% of American women, over 70% of American mothers are in the workforce. And the workforce still assumes that all of us, women and men, have somebody at home. So when the carpool doesn't work and there's an injury, and my favorite is always when your kid says, oh yeah, I have this project. It was assigned 3 weeks ago. It's due tomorrow. No, I don't have any of the materials. It's that kind of thing. That this is really about making room for what is a fact for all of us. And the second part of the book says not just women, but men. And that unless we think of men as working fathers in the same way we think of women as working mothers, where we're all both, we're not going to make the changes we need to make.
Let me pick up, because in that answer you just used the term working father.
Yes.
Not something you hear as much as working mother, although I think you just used that as well. And one of the things you stress over and over in the book is it matters how we talk about this stuff. It may be semantics, but that matters. I was struck, I got waylaid by the coffee yesterday. I was on stage doing different interviews, and a man in the audience who noticed I was going to be interviewing you about this today grabbed me and said, you know what I love that she does in this? She uses the term lead parent.
Yes.
And that's so much more empowering than stay-at-home mom. Stay-at-home dad. Semantics, but it matters.
But it does matter. And I'm old enough to remember when we went from Miss and Mrs. to Ms. And I remember everybody thought this was terrible. I lived in the South, and we'd been saying Ms. forever, but still...
Different meaning.
Different meaning. And, people thought it was silly, but of course it wasn't silly, because Miss and Mrs. told everybody that what mattered most about a woman was her marital status. And nobody could tell whether a man was married or not. And similarly, absolutely, the fact that we always say working mother, and what we say about that is we're still assuming a mother's job is to be caring for her children, so if she's working, you need an adjective. But we never say working father, when in fact, if you described all the men out there, all the men in this audience who have children as working fathers, you'd be saying his job is to raise those children and not just to provide an income, it's to raise them through care. The other one, I hate the idea. Never ever say that a man is babysitting his children.
Yeah.
I mean, let's kill that. And this one I think is a little less intuitive. We've got to banish the word he's helping at home, right? Helping is not actually taking the burden off you. You are still figuring out what needs to be done, and you are asking him to help. He is not the agent, right? He's the assistant. And if we're going to get to where we need to go, men do have to be lead parents or fully equal co-parents. And that means, and this was hard for me, Andy said, I'm happy to do this, or I want to support you, I'm going to do this, but I'm not doing it your way, right? I'm doing it my way. And I don't care if you don't like how I fix up the kitchen. And I don't care if you think that I'm disciplining the boys different way than you do. You want to do it your way, you come home. And that's something I think a lot of us as women actually kind of secretly think we really do know better at home. And so we really do need to direct them. And that's sexism just as much as a man in the office thinking he knows better and he's going to tell you. So that's a big change.
In my house, we summarize this as the milk challenge, in the sense that my husband says, I'm always happy to stop on the way home from work if we're out of milk and you tell me we need it. I say, yeah, but you will never notice that we're out of milk. That is being the lead parent at home. Well,
would you let him, though, be complete? Would you let him, decide what to shop for?
I think we'd all end up drinking orange juice.
Yeah, but that's part of the
different
point.
Conversation. All right, well, I know people want to hear some of your advice for how, in your 3 years of pondering this, what you've come up with. One of the strategies that you advocate is interval training.
Yeah.
Explain.
So, we think about our careers, again, sort of 1950s. You get into the workforce, you go up as fast as you can, pretty much, and then at some point it's over and you may go laterally and then down. I suggest, like athletes, we think about interval training where for an athlete to be in peak performance, they go really hard and then they slow down and they go really hard again. And actually, young people are going to have many, many different jobs. That change is already happening. And they ought to plan for their career to think about, all right, there's this period where I don't have kids, I'm not taking care of my own parents, I can travel around the world, I can work those crazy jobs that do require you to be on all the time. And then there are these periods where, in my case, after I got tenure, I spent 5 years trying to have kids. I was still working, but work was not my primary focus. Then I became a dean, and I went really hard. Then I slowed down again. Went into government, slowed down.
The whole on-ramp, off-ramp,
Absolutely.
same concept?
Well, yes, except, so part of it does assume you keep your hand in,
Yeah.
right? And one of the great things about the on-demand economy at the high end is that you can still work on a project basis. Doctors, coders, lawyers, engineers, there are ways to do this now on a project basis. And so it's more not on-ramp so much as ramping up and ramping down and deciding, we were talking before and you were saying your kids are now at the same school. That's a wonderful thing, right? That gives you time to go harder, or you trade off with your husband, right? So, your husband can be lead parent for a while, and then, you can trade off.
Your boss at the State Department
Yes.
was Hillary Clinton, whose latest trove of emails came out yesterday. Your name pops up a number of times. I want to ask you about one email that's been made public from Christmas 2009.
10,
I think it was
9.
2009.
2009, you're right, it's 2009.
Christmas 2009, and you wrote basically begging Hillary Clinton to take a day off. Do you remember this?
Yeah, well, I do.
What prompted it?
Well, the email says, please leave on the 21st so that those of us who are necessary to make Christmas happen, and here I will say with all deference to my lead parent husband, that for a long time he believed in Santa Claus because stockings were filled by the
tree
chimney
magically,
with care, right?
yeah.
I mean, it just magically happened. And he would say to me the first week in December, you seem really stressed. And I would be going, So I was essentially saying to her, look, for those of us who make the holidays, Christian or Jewish or any other holidays, if you leave, we will feel free to go home. Mm-hmm. If you stay till the 23rd or 24th, everybody's going to feel like they have to stay. And I was basically saying, and in my house, my children are not going to have much of a Christmas. But I knew she cared about that. That's the piece that doesn't come out. I wasn't writing just out of the blue. I knew Hillary Clinton cared. I'd talked to her about, having kids and juggling this when she hired me. And Cheryl Mills had twins at home. So
another senior State Department.
Absolutely.
So,
and she did. That's the other thing. You can't see in the email, but she did actually leave on the 21st. And I did go home. And I think she was very, very sensitive
no
to that.
diplomacy was conducted for a few days, and somehow we all
we all survived.
We all survived. I mean, I think what's so fascinating about that is you're upfront and gracious and acknowledging in the book and in the article that you're writing from a privileged position. That for many, many people, it's not about having it all. It's about having enough to just barely make ends meet. But it's fascinating to be reminded that you can be Hillary Clinton. You can be one of the most powerful people in the world with more staffers than you can come up with things to have them do, and she's still struggling with the whole work-life balance the way that we all do.
But she, if you worked for her, you knew that she cared. And I give the anecdote in the book of Jim Steinberg, who was Deputy Secretary of State, and there's this 1 week where he just isn't making the early morning meeting, and his assistant is showing up. And by day 4, Secretary Clinton was a little bit irritated. That's the Deputy Secretary of State. And so she sort of says, with just a touch of asperity, so where's Jim? And his assistant said, well, his wife is traveling this week, so this is his week. He's taking his daughters to school, and he'll be back. And of course, her reaction was, why didn't you tell me? He went up in her estimation at that moment, right? And so we knew that there was a ready willingness to accommodate to the extent you could.
It's one thing, I guess, if you're the number 2 guy at State, though, and it's another thing if you're, the janitor trying to get that office ready, or the secretary who's backing everybody up, and one of your messages is leading from the top.
But this is also where I really do think focusing on care changes the conversation, because focusing on advancing women. And again, I want women in the top of every profession, but when we think about it that way, we start counting. Because that's the way you measure how well women are doing. So we count how many women are in the Fortune 500, and we count how many women are in senior management, and how many women computer scientists. All of that does focus pretty much on wealthy white women, by and large. It does not focus on the millions of women at the bottom, because one of the things I realize is we have too few women at the top and too many women at the bottom. And care, or our lack of support for care, plays a role at both ends. At the top end, it means if you take time out for care, your career goes off track. But for the millions of women at the bottom, not supporting their care means if they take a day off, they can lose a job, right? And so focusing on care says we have to put in place the policies that rich women can buy their way out of often. We have to put in leave, paid family leave, maternity and paternity leave, and quality, affordable childcare.
I'm sure is not lost on the audience that we are two women up here having this conversation.
Yes.
And I want to close by another confession, I guess, which is when I was asked to do this interview, I leapt at it because I knew I would want to read your book, and I'm delighted to get the chance to talk to you, but there was a tiny part of me thinking, they should give this to a man, which speaks to your earlier point about having men in this conversation. How many of the book interviews have you done that have been with male journalists?
I've done a couple. I've done a couple. We were at Fareed Zakaria has both Andy and me on his show this weekend, and Tom Ashbrook. I've done a couple, and I'm getting lots of responses from men.
Interesting. What are you
yesterday,
hearing?
I did a radio show where a lot of men called in and talked about how they're just as competent at home, and they don't like the assumption that they're not. I do think that this conversation is ready to be broken open by men. And part of it is men are missing out. Right? One of the things my husband said, he wrote this article in The Atlantic, why I put my wife's career first, and he says it was hard on his career, it was better for his marriage, it was better for our sons, and it was better for him. That he has a relationship with them that his father never had with him, that he is grounded as sort of the anchor of our family in a way that I think women, that's part of what we get out of being mothers and also being professionals. So why shouldn't men have the equal ability to really enjoy what fatherhood's about, or to be with your own parents as they are toward the end of their lives? It's not a burden. When it works, it's the greatest thing in the world. We just need to make it work for everybody.
It's an empowering message. Anne-Marie Slaughter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.